I caught my spoiled sister kissing my boyfriend a week before her wedding. Everyone thought I was exaggerating until the day of the ceremony. You won't believe what happened at the altar. Subscribe and write in the comments, what city are you from? The morning sunlight filtered gently through the blinds of Kira's apartment, painting warm streaks across the hardwood floor. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the kitchen, and soft jazz played from a small speaker on the counter. It should have been a peaceful Sunday, the kind that whispered promises of quiet moments and slow afternoons. But inside Kira, something was stirring, a vague, persistent unrest she couldn't quite explain. Kira sat at the breakfast table, absently stirring her coffee, her eyes watching the steam rise in soft spirals. Across from her, Ethan scrolled through his phone, unaware of her scrutiny. His sandy blonde hair fell just slightly over his brow, and he wore the same relaxed smile he always had when he was with her. Yet lately, Kira had begun to question how much of that smile still belonged to her. Her thoughts wandered to the night before, her younger sister Jasmine's engagement dinner, hosted at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Chicago. Jasmine, radiant as ever, had been the center of attention. Her curls bounced with every laugh, and her emerald green dress seemed to shimmer under the fairy lights. Kira had been proud, genuinely so, but there was something in the way Jasmine's attention had strayed, something in the way she hovered near Ethan, that stuck with her like a splinter. She sipped her coffee slowly, the bitterness matching her mood. "You okay?" Ethan looked up at her, his phone forgotten for a moment. Kira smiled quickly, reflexively. "Yeah, just thinking." He reached across the table, giving her hand a light squeeze. "Don't overthink things. You do that sometimes." She nodded, but the words nestled uneasily in her chest. She wasn't sure if she was overthinking. In fact, she feared she wasn't thinking enough. Jasmine had always been the darling of the family. 2 years younger than Kira, she'd been the one everyone gravitated toward. Where Kira was quiet and introspective, Jasmine was animated and charming, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and have strangers laughing in minutes. Their parents had always doted on her more openly, and while Kira had long since made peace with that, more or less, she couldn't deny the shadow it had cast over their relationship. When Jasmine had gotten engaged to Stephen, a quiet, steady man from a nearby suburb, Kira had been genuinely happy for her. She'd even helped plan the engagement party, picked out color schemes for the wedding, and offered advice when Jasmine struggled to narrow down the guest list. It wasn't jealousy that nagged at her now. It was something else, something more primal. A sense of territory breached. At the dinner, Jasmine had laughed too long at Ethan's jokes. She'd playfully touched his arm as they all posed for a group photo. She'd leaned in too closely when asking him about his architecture projects, details she'd never shown any interest in before. Kira had watched all of it from across the table, the smile on her face frozen, her stomach tightening with each small gesture. After dinner, while Ethan had gone to retrieve their coats, Jasmine had pulled Kira aside and grinned conspiratorially. "You got yourself a good one," she said, her voice low and teasing. "He's cute and funny, like surprisingly funny." Kira had forced a smile. "Yeah, I know." Now, in the morning light, those words echoed louder than they had the night before. Later that day, they visited her parents' house for a casual Sunday lunch. The Wilsons were proud of their girls, and their home, an elegant brick 2-story on the south side, was always buzzing with life and voices. Her mother had made too much food, as always, and her father sat in the living room watching football with Stephen, who barely said a word but smiled politely whenever spoken to. Jasmine floated through the rooms in a pastel sundress, barefoot, sipping lemonade. She was in full bride-to-be mode, talking about flower arrangements and seating charts, flipping through Pinterest boards on her iPad. Kira tried to focus on her mother's stories about work, but her gaze kept drifting to the kitchen, where Jasmine and Ethan stood side by side, laughing quietly about something on his phone. Kira excused herself and moved to the kitchen. As she entered, Jasmine looked up with a glowing smile. "There you are. We were just looking at these terrible wedding cakes," she giggled, holding up the screen. "Can you believe someone actually made this?" Ethan chuckled beside her, scratching the back of his neck. "It's like a crime against frosting." Kira forced a laugh, but her eyes flicked between the two. Jasmine's hand was still resting casually on Ethan's shoulder, and he didn't seem in a hurry to move away. That sick feeling rose again, slow and thick in her chest. "I think Mom needs help setting the table," she said flatly, and Jasmine blinked before stepping back. "Right. Of course," she said, handing Kira the iPad. That evening, back in their apartment, Kira couldn't stay silent any longer. "Did you notice how Jasmine was acting today?" she asked while folding a blanket on the couch. Ethan looked up from the TV, confused. "What do you mean?" "The way she talks to you, stands too close, laughs like you're a damn stand-up comedian. It's been happening a lot lately." Ethan frowned, clearly caught off guard. "I thought she was just being friendly. She's always like that." "No," Kira said, her voice tighter than she intended. "Not like that." He stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Kira, come on. She's your sister. She's getting married. Why would she—" "I don't know," she interrupted, setting the blanket down. "But it's bothering me, and it feels wrong." He stood and crossed the room, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "I think you're overthinking it. Jasmine flirts with everyone. It's not personal." "But it is personal," Kira whispered, "because she knows you're mine." Ethan paused, his thumbs brushing over her collarbone. "Do you trust me?" Kira looked into his eyes. She wanted to say yes. She needed to say yes. But something, some quiet, ancient part of her, refused to speak. Instead, she said, "Just watch her next time. Really watch." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay." She tried to sleep that night, but rest would not come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way Jasmine looked at Ethan. Not with the eyes of a sister-in-law, but with the intent focus of a woman intrigued. Kira hated how it made her feel. Possessive, suspicious, paranoid. But deep down, beneath the rationalizations and excuses, a voice inside her whispered what she was still too afraid to say out loud. This wasn't just harmless attention. Something was happening, and she was the only one who saw it. The following week unfolded with an almost unbearable sense of anticipation. Kira tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But the more she tried to dismiss the growing discomfort, the more vivid the images became. Jasmine's lingering touches, the low timbre of her laughter, the way Ethan seemed increasingly distracted when they were together. It wasn't that he had grown distant, but something subtle had shifted, like the faint scent of smoke in the air before a fire breaks out. Monday evening found Kira alone in the apartment, curled up on the couch with her laptop resting on her thighs. Ethan had texted her that he was staying late at work, again. She stared at the screen for a long time, not reading the article she had opened. Her mind was with him, or rather with them. Were they together right now? Talking? Laughing? She scolded herself for even entertaining the thought. Jasmine was her sister. Ethan was her boyfriend, and yet unease dug its claws deeper into her chest. She tried to keep busy. Her marketing job at the downtown agency provided enough deadlines to distract her during the day, but nights were harder. The silence in the apartment amplified every fear, every suspicion. And then there were the texts. Jasmine had begun messaging Ethan directly more often. It started with simple questions, suggestions about the wedding playlist, or asking for his opinion on reception seating. But then came the odd compliments tucked in like afterthoughts. "Thanks for helping me stay sane, LOL. You always know what to say." Or, "Steven doesn't really get this stuff, but you just get it, you know?" They were subtle, innocent on the surface, but to Kira they felt like warning signs. One night, after Ethan had dozed off beside her, Kira hesitated, then reached for his phone. She hated herself for it, but the pull was too strong. She scrolled through his messages and found the thread with Jasmine. Nothing explicit, but the tone was far too familiar. The emojis, the way she called him E, a picture of her trying on a second wedding dress, captioned, "Too much or just enough?" Kira's throat tightened. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she lay awake for hours, her thoughts spiraling. She knew what she had seen. It wasn't physical, not yet, but it was something. An energy. A thread pulled too tight, ready to snap. The weekend brought another family gathering. Jasmine had insisted on hosting a small brunch at their parents' house for the bridal party. Kira had tried to get out of it, but her mother's voice on the phone left little room for refusal. "It's important to your sister," she said firmly. "She wants you there." So she went. The house was filled with the scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh flowers. Jasmine greeted everyone at the door, wearing a soft blue dress that clung to her curves just enough to feel deliberate. When she hugged Kira, it was brief and stiff. "You made it," she said brightly. "Would have been hard not to," Kira replied, managing a smile. The living room buzzed with chatter. Bridesmaids flipped through fabric swatches, while Jasmine glided from group to group, laughing, sipping champagne, holding court like the queen she had always been. Ethan arrived a little late, offering apologies and a bottle of white wine he'd picked up on the way. Jasmine lit up when she saw him. "You came," she said, her tone light but her eyes intense. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, and Kira felt the sting of something sharp and unseen. Throughout the brunch, Jasmine gravitated toward Ethan. She pulled him into conversations, asked his opinions, touched his arm when he spoke. At one point, as they stood by the kitchen island, she laughed and tossed her head back, her hand resting gently on his chest. Kira saw it all from across the room. Her blood simmered. Later, as they gathered in the backyard, Jasmine brought out a photo board she'd made for the wedding. Pictures of her and Steven through the years. But Kira noticed something odd. There, tucked among the couple shots, was a candid photo from last summer's lake trip. Jasmine in a bikini, laughing at something Ethan had said. He was in the frame, too, shirtless, reaching toward her with a beach towel. Kira remembered that moment. She had taken the photo. Back then, it meant nothing. Now, it was a slap in the face. She waited until they were alone. Ethan stood by the edge of the patio, sipping his drink, watching the garden. "You and Jasmine seem to have a lot to talk about lately," she said, her voice low. He turned to her, surprised. "She's planning a wedding. Everyone talks to me about it. She sent you a picture of herself in a wedding dress." He blinked. It was a joke. She said it was too over the top and wanted a guy's opinion. Kira crossed her arms. "And you think that's normal?" I think she's stressed and wants everything to be perfect. And maybe she likes the attention, but it doesn't mean anything. Doesn't it? He set his drink down, frustrated. What do you want me to say, Kira? That I should block her number? That I should be rude to your sister? I want you to see what I see, she said, her voice cracking. I want you to acknowledge that this isn't just about wedding planning. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I don't see what you see. I see a woman getting married in a week and trying to include everyone she loves. Kira stepped back, swallowing hard. And what about me? Do you see me? His expression softened, but he said nothing. They didn't speak much the rest of the day. On the drive home, the silence between them was thick, punctuated only by the hum of the highway. Kira stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her thoughts tangled and raw. The next morning, Kira sat at her desk at work, unable to focus. Her coworker Maya stopped by to chat, but Kira could barely string together a coherent response. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching her life from the outside. She picked up her phone and opened Jasmine's Instagram. The feed was filled with wedding prep, flowers, invitations, cake tastings, but it was the stories that caught her attention. A boomerang of Ethan helping Jasmine hang paper lanterns on her balcony. A caption that read, "Couldn't do this without him." Her heart sank. That night, Kira lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Ethan was asleep beside her, his breathing steady. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe Jasmine. But trust wasn't a switch she could flip on command. It was a bridge, fragile and trembling, and she felt it cracking beneath her feet. She reached for her phone, opened a blank note, and typed a single sentence. It's not in my head. I see what I see. She turned off the screen and let the darkness swallow her whole. The next few days passed in a fog of confusion, silence, and fragile routine. Kira moved through them like a ghost in her own life, going to work, cooking dinner, folding laundry, yet every action felt mechanical, devoid of its usual rhythm. Ethan, for his part, tried to act normal. He told her about his day, kissed her goodbye in the mornings, offered to make her tea in the evenings. But there was something off in the way he lingered just long enough to appear attentive, yet never quite long enough to truly connect. He was present but distant, responsive but disengaged. It felt like a performance. And Kira couldn't pretend anymore that she didn't notice. One evening after work, Kira found herself standing at the kitchen counter slicing vegetables for dinner, the knife hitting the cutting board in a steady, aggressive rhythm. Ethan walked in and paused when he saw her. She didn't look up. "You're home early," she said. "Got out of a meeting," he replied, setting his bag down. "Figured I'd help with dinner." She kept chopping, her eyes fixed on the carrots. "Don't you have another flower consultation with Jasmine tonight?" Ethan exhaled through his nose. "It's not like that." Kira finally looked up, her eyes sharp. "Not like what?" "Like you're thinking," he said quietly. "Then how is it, Ethan?" she asked, setting the knife down. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my sister can't seem to organize her wedding without you. And you, well, you never seem to mind." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become more frequent lately. "I'm just trying to help." "She has a fiancé," Kira snapped. "She has friends. She has bridesmaids. Why does it always have to be you?" Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension stretched between them like a taut wire. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he said eventually. "I haven't crossed a line." "You haven't stopped her from crossing one," Kira replied. He stepped closer, his voice softening. Do you really think I'd cheat on you? With your sister? I think people do a lot of things they never imagined themselves doing, she said, especially when the lines get blurred and no one is calling them out. Ethan looked away, jaw clenched. She's your sister, Kira. What do you want me to do? Be rude to her? Tell her to back off and ruin your family dynamic a week before her wedding? Kira took a step back, her heart pounding. I want you to care more about how I feel than about keeping things comfortable. I want you to say, without hesitation, that you don't want her attention, that you love me and only me, and that you're willing to draw a line. I do love you, Ethan said quickly, and I've never wanted Jasmine. Then why is it so hard to tell her that? Kira asked. He hesitated, and that pause was louder than any answer. Their argument ended not with a resolution, but with silence. Ethan retreated to the bedroom, and Kira sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. Her body was tense, her throat tight. She felt like she was suffocating in her own home. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand that the people who claimed to love her stop making her feel like the villain for noticing what was happening in plain sight. The next morning, she woke with a dull ache behind her eyes. Ethan had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen table that said, "Didn't want to wake you. Love you." It felt hollow, like a postcard from a stranger. She called Jasmine that afternoon. "Hey, can we meet up?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. "Of course," Jasmine replied, chipper as always. "Coffee later? I know a cute place near the bridal shop." "Yeah, that works," Kira said, hanging up before she lost her nerve. They met at a small cafe nestled on a tree-lined street, where couples sipped lattes on the patio and college students typed furiously into laptops. Jasmine arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a coral jumpsuit and oversized sunglasses, glowing with the kind of happiness that felt manufactured. "Sorry, I'm late," she chirped, hugging Kira before sitting down. "I had to stop by and check the alterations on my dress. They're running behind schedule, and I swear, if the hem isn't perfect—" "Jasmine," Kira said, cutting her off. Jasmine blinked, startled. "What?" "We need to talk," Kira said, folding her hands in front of her. Her sister tilted her head, confused. "About what?" "About you and Ethan," Kira said, watching her carefully. Jasmine's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. "What about us?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Kira said, her voice low but firm. "The texts, the constant time together, the way you touch him, the way you laugh at everything he says. I'm not imagining it." Jasmine sat back, crossing her arms. "You're being dramatic." "No," Kira said. "I'm being honest. And I need you to be honest with me, too. What's going on?" "Nothing is going on," Jasmine said, her tone turning defensive. "Ethan is just helping me out. You know how stressful wedding planning is." "That's not an excuse to flirt with my boyfriend," Kira snapped. "I'm not flirting with him," Jasmine said, her voice rising. A few people at nearby tables glanced over. She lowered her voice and leaned forward. "You really think I'd do that to you?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Kira admitted, "but I know what I see, and I know how it makes me feel." Jasmine looked away, her jaw tight. "Maybe you should ask yourself why you're so insecure." Kira's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who keeps crossing boundaries, and Ethan isn't stopping you. That's not insecurity. That's reality." Jasmine stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the pavement. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of something I didn't do. If you can't trust your own sister, that's your problem." She grabbed her purse and walked away, leaving Kira sitting alone with a half-finished coffee and a heart full of rage. Kira didn't cry. She didn't chase her. She just sat there, the noise of the cafe dimming as her pulse roared in her ears. That night, she told Ethan what had happened. He sat on the edge of the bed, frowning. "Why did you confront her like that?" he asked. "Because no one else would," Kira said. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening." "She's upset," Ethan said. "You've got to understand. She's about to get married. And I'm supposed to just let her walk all over me because of that?" Kira demanded. "I'm supposed to smile while she flirts with you and tell myself it's just nerves?" "I'm not taking sides," he said quickly. "It sure feels like you are," she said. He rubbed his eyes. "I just think maybe you overreacted." Kira stood there in stunned silence, her arms at her sides, her heart sinking lower than she thought possible. "So, now it's my fault?" "No, that's not what I meant," Ethan said, standing. Look, I know this is hard, but maybe there was a better way to handle it." Kira shook her head. "There's no good way to handle being disrespected. There's just speaking up or staying silent. And I'm done staying silent." They didn't sleep well that night. Kira lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how love could turn into doubt so quietly, so thoroughly, without her noticing. She had once imagined a future with Ethan. Long weekends, a little house with a backyard, maybe even a dog. But now, even the thought of waking up next to him felt foreign. Her phone buzzed once, a message from her mother. "Your sister is heartbroken. Fix this." Kira didn't reply. She stared at the glowing screen until it dimmed and the room went dark again. The days that followed were long, gray stretches of disconnection. Kira went to work, returned home, and drifted through the hours like a passenger in her own life. Conversations with Ethan had become stilted, their rhythm interrupted by a current of tension neither of them addressed. The weight of her confrontation with Jasmine lingered in every room, every breath. The silence between the sisters had grown into a wall neither was willing to scale, and Kira felt herself withdrawing more with each passing day. Ethan tried to act like nothing had changed. He continued bringing her coffee in the mornings, kissing her temple before work, asking her how her day was. But Kira could see through it all. The gestures felt obligatory, mechanical. There was no warmth in his eyes anymore, no depth behind the pleasantries. And worse, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still talking to Jasmine. Perhaps not as openly, but secretly, with the ease of people who shared something neither of them wanted to admit. Kira began to question her own instincts again. Was she being too harsh? Had she misread Jasmine's behavior? Was it possible she'd let her own fears poison a relationship that wasn't truly threatened? But no matter how many times she tried to rationalize it, the image of Jasmine leaning in toward Ethan, laughing too loudly, touching him just a second too long, would replay in her mind like a memory refusing to fade. Late one Thursday evening, Kira sat curled up in the corner of the couch, a blanket over her legs and a book unopened in her lap. Ethan was in the bedroom, on a video call for work, or so he said. She could hear the murmur of his voice through the wall, too low to make out the words, but clear enough to know he was engaged. She stared at the spine of her book and tried not to imagine Jasmine's name lighting up his screen. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was a text from her mother. "I spoke to Jasmine. She's devastated. She says you accused her of things that aren't true. She's heartbroken, Kira. You need to fix this before the wedding. She needs her sister." Kira stared at the message, her jaw tightening. She didn't reply. Instead, she set her phone down and stood, pacing the room. Her mother's words dug under her skin like barbs. She always took Jasmine's side. Always. From the time they were kids, it had been Jasmine who was praised, protected, forgiven. Kira had been the strong one, the independent one, the one who didn't need coddling. And now, when she finally voiced her hurt, her fear, her boundaries, once again, she was the problem. She walked into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water, the motion slow and deliberate. She was tired of being the one expected to apologize just to keep the peace. Tired of biting her tongue while her world shifted under her feet. The next evening, Kira drove to her parents' house. She hadn't planned to, but something inside her needed to be in the space where it all began. Her childhood home stood just as it always had. Warm lights glowing behind lace curtains, the porch swing gently rocking in the breeze. She sat in her car for several minutes, gathering herself before stepping out and making her way to the front door. She didn't knock. She had a key, the same one her father gave her when she moved out a decade earlier. She slipped it into the lock, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. The house was quiet. The air smelled of lavender and lemon polish. She stepped inside and paused, listening. Soft voices filtered through from the back, faint, intimate, not her parents. Her heart began to pound. Drawn forward by a mix of dread and instinct, she moved through the hallway and toward the backyard. Her footsteps were light, her breath shallow. As she neared the glass doors leading to the garden, she heard the low murmur of laughter, familiar, unmistakable. She reached the edge of the patio and stopped, her body going rigid. There, behind a thick row of flowering bushes, partially concealed by shadows, were Ethan and Jasmine. They were pressed close together, arms wrapped tightly around one another. Jasmine's legs were wrapped around his waist, her face tilted upward, her eyes closed. Ethan's hands gripped her waist, sliding beneath the fabric of her blouse. They were kissing, deeply, hungrily, oblivious to the world around them. Kira's mind went blank. For a moment, she couldn't move, she couldn't breathe. All she could do was stand there, rooted to the earth, her entire body pulsing with disbelief. It was as though every fear, every suspicion, every sleepless night had conspired to bring her to this exact moment. And here it was, the truth, undeniable, violent, real. Her body reacted before her brain could catch up. Her voice, loud and trembling, ripped through the still evening air. "What the hell is this?" The words echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Ethan and Jasmine broke apart instantly, stumbling as if struck. Jasmine's face drained of color. Ethan took a step back, his hands raised as though in defense. "Kira," he began, but the words died on his lips. Kira stared at them, her entire being shaking. Her voice cracked as she spoke again, lower now but just as sharp. "How could you?" Neither of them answered. Jasmine's mouth opened and closed, her hands fumbling with her blouse. Ethan looked like he wanted to run. "You were supposed to be my sister," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were supposed to love me." Jasmine finally found her voice. "I'm so sorry," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We didn't mean for this to happen." "Don't," Kira snapped. "Don't insult me with lies." She turned on her heel and walked away, her legs moving on autopilot, her ears ringing. Behind her, she heard their voices, Jasmine crying, Ethan calling her name. But she didn't stop. She didn't look back. She climbed into her car, slammed the door, and drove. The streetlights blurred past as she sped through the city, her grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the storm inside her. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go home. Not to their apartment, not to her parents' house, not anywhere that held the memory of what she had just seen. She ended up in a motel on the edge of the city, a place with peeling paint and flickering neon. She paid in cash, took the key, and climbed the stairs to a room that smelled faintly of bleach and regret. She locked the door behind her, dropped her bag on the bed, and collapsed beside it. Only then did she cry. The tears came in waves, hot, bitter, unrelenting. She cried for herself, for the love she'd lost, for the trust shattered. She cried for every time she told herself she was imagining things, for every time she was told she was overreacting, for every moment she doubted her own sanity in the name of preserving peace. When her sobs finally subsided, she reached for her phone. It was lit up with notifications, missed calls, messages, voicemails. She didn't open any of them. Instead, she typed a single text to Ethan. "We're done. Don't contact me again." Then she turned off the phone and buried it beneath a pillow. She lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, the motel fan whirring softly above her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after that, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't suffocating in doubt. The truth, as brutal as it was, had been revealed. There was no more pretending, no more guessing. It was over. Everything she had built, her relationship, her bond with Jasmine, her place in the family, was gone. But something else had begun. In that small, dimly lit room, Kira found a sliver of clarity beneath the pain. She had trusted her instincts, and they had not betrayed her. The people she loved had. And now, all that remained was the long road forward. The morning after the betrayal arrived like a thief, stealing what little peace the night had offered. Pale light filtered through the blinds of the motel room, illuminating the cheap wallpaper and the half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. Kira lay motionless in the stiff bed, her body aching as though she had been physically beaten, her mind heavy and hollow at once. She had barely slept, drifting in and out of restless dreams where Jasmine and Ethan's faces hovered just out of reach. Always laughing, always whispering. Now, fully awake, she stared at the ceiling, numb and wide-eyed, unable to summon the strength to move. Her phone, still buried under the pillow where she had hidden it the night before, vibrated faintly. She ignored it. The world outside that room was not one she was ready to return to. Not yet. Eventually, her body protested enough to force her up. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat for a long time, elbows on her knees, face buried in her hands. She hadn't cried again, not since last night. It was as if she'd emptied herself, and now there was nothing left. No tears, no rage, just the slow-burning hum of realization. Her life had changed permanently. She moved through the morning in a trance, showering under lukewarm water, brushing her teeth with a new toothbrush she'd bought from the vending machine in the lobby, dressing in the same clothes she'd worn the day before. She didn't care. There was no one to impress, no facade to maintain. The lies were gone now, and with them, any need to perform. It was nearly noon when she finally turned on her phone. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications. 37 missed calls, over 50 unread messages, voicemails, alerts, DMs. She scrolled through them, her thumb barely making contact. Ethan. Please, just talk to me. Jasmine. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, let me explain. Her mother. What is going on? Your sister is in tears. Fix this before the wedding. Her father, uncharacteristically brief, "Call your mother." She threw the phone onto the bed and sat down hard on the edge of the mattress. The weight of her family's expectations was pressing in from every angle, but she felt no urgency to answer them. They had made their choices. They had looked past her pain before. Why should this be any different? Hours passed. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. She stared at the muted television, flipping through channels without seeing what was on. Outside the window, the city hummed in its indifference. People moved, cars passed. Life went on, oblivious to the quiet collapse of hers. That evening, as the sky turned a soft, bruised purple, Kira finally made a decision. One person still didn't know the truth. Stephen. She found his number easily. It was still saved in her phone from the group chats Jasmine had started for wedding planning. For a moment, her finger hovered above the call button. Her stomach churned. She didn't want to hurt him, but he deserved to know. He had the right to decide what kind of future he was stepping into, and with whom. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Hello?" His voice was calm, curious. "Stephen," Kira said, her voice catching slightly. "It's Kira." There was a pause. "Hey, I've been trying to figure out what's going on. Jasmine said you left, that something happened." She closed her eyes. "I need to tell you something, and it's going to hurt." He didn't interrupt. He didn't protest. He simply waited. So she told him. She told him everything. From the first moments of unease, to the texts, to the cafe confrontation, to what she had seen in the garden. She told him about the way Jasmine had laughed too loudly, touched too often, lingered too long. She described the kiss, how Jasmine's legs had been around Ethan's waist, how they hadn't even noticed her standing there. Her voice didn't shake. Her tone didn't rise. She delivered the truth the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis. Clean, precise, necessary. When she was done, there was silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy pause that stretched until Kira wondered if he was still there. Then, finally, Stephen spoke. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and steady. I'm going to need some time." "I understand," Kira whispered, and then he hung up. She stared at the phone for a while after that, then placed it back on the nightstand. The room felt quieter now, still painful, still suffocating, but lighter too. One less secret to carry. The wedding was now 3 days away. Kira had no intention of attending. Instead, she booked another night at the motel, pulled the blanket over herself, and let the darkness take her again. On the morning of the wedding, Kira woke to a message from her cousin Emma. It was brief, frantic, filled with exclamation points. "Call me. You won't believe what happened." Her heart rate spiked. She called without hesitation. Emma answered on the first ring, breathless. "Oh my God, Kira," she said, her voice hushed and disbelieving. "You're not going to believe this. Stephen, he called off the wedding." Kira sat up, stunned. "What?" "At the altar," Emma whispered. Everyone was seated. Jasmine was walking down the aisle. She looked beautiful, honestly. Everything looked perfect, but right before the vows, Stephen just stopped. He turned to the guests and said he had something to say. Kira's mouth went dry. "He told everyone that he couldn't go through with the wedding," Emma continued, "that he had learned something about Jasmine, something unforgivable. He said she had betrayed her sister, that he couldn't marry someone capable of that." Kira's breath caught in her throat. People were gasping, Emma said. "Your mom looked like she'd been slapped. Jasmine froze, and then she just started crying. She begged him not to do this, but he just walked out, right there, in front of everyone. Kira pressed her hand to her mouth. Emma was still talking. Your dad tried to get up and say something, but nobody knew what to do. It was chaos. Absolute chaos. And Jasmine. God, Kira, she looked like the floor had opened under her. Your mom followed Stephen, tried to talk to him outside, but he just kept walking. Kira closed her eyes. The truth had come out. Not in whispers, not behind closed doors. Out loud, public, unavoidable, and for the first time in days, Kira felt the smallest flicker of peace. Are you okay? Emma asked gently. I don't know, Kira said honestly, but I think I'm finally breathing again. They spoke a little longer, Emma describing how the guests had reacted, how Jasmine had eventually fled the church, how no one knew what would happen next. But Kira didn't need to hear any more. The image was vivid enough in her mind. Jasmine, standing alone at the altar, her perfect day crumbling, the weight of her choices finally pressing down. When she hung up, Kira didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply sat in silence, letting the moment settle over her like snowfall, soft, relentless, cold. Her phone buzzed again, another message from her mother. You've humiliated this family. I hope you're proud of yourself. Kira stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without replying. She stood, walked to the mirror, and studied her reflection. There were dark circles under her eyes, lines around her mouth she didn't remember earning. But there was also something new, something resolute, something hard. She wasn't proud, but she wasn't ashamed either. She had spoken the truth when no one wanted to hear it. She had defended her boundaries, her dignity, her pain. And now, finally, the illusion had shattered. The morning after the failed wedding broke with an eerie calm. Outside the motel window, the city moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Traffic rumbled in the distance. A child laughed somewhere on the street below, and the usual buzz of life returned like a tide. But inside Kira, time had stopped. She sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a borrowed silence, eyes blank, body still. The night before had ended with vindication, yet she did not feel triumphant. There was no joy in watching a family crumble, no satisfaction in seeing her sister's world collapse. She had wanted justice, yes, but she had not wished for ruin. That distinction weighed heavily in her chest. The news had traveled fast. By the time she ventured out for coffee, her phone was a minefield of updates, opinions, and recriminations. Her mother had called twice more, each voicemail more furious than the last. Her father, more restrained but no less disapproving, left a text message that simply read, "You went too far." Others had been less harsh, cousins expressing shock, distant relatives offering vague words of support, some even saying they'd always thought Jasmine was a little too friendly. But none of it mattered now. The wedding was over. Ethan was gone. And so was the fragile version of Kira that had once tried to make sense of other people's betrayals. She stayed at the motel another day, needing time to come down from the adrenaline that had carried her through the storm. She wandered the streets, her thoughts a blur. She stopped in bookstores, sat on benches, stared at strangers. She ate when she remembered, slept when her body demanded it. Mostly, she just existed, quietly, in the shell of who she used to be. By Sunday night, she knew she couldn't hide forever. She needed to return to her apartment, if only to confront what was left. She drove back through the city, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind oddly clear. The building loomed familiar as ever, tall and quiet under the early evening sky. She parked, climbed the stairs, and stood at the door for a full minute before unlocking it. Inside, the air was stale, untouched. Ethan hadn't returned. The key she had given him still sat in the little ceramic dish by the door, placed there like a silent apology. His coat was gone. So were his sneakers, the shaving cream she hated, and the book he kept on the nightstand, but the couch still held the imprint of his weight, and the scent of his cologne lingered faintly in the hallway. She walked through each room slowly, opening drawers, checking closets, not out of need, but out of habit, out of the desire to confirm, beyond all doubt, that this chapter was closed. When she reached the bedroom, she paused. On her pillow was a letter, folded neatly. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper, heavy with meaning. She sat down and unfolded it. "Kira, I don't expect forgiveness. I won't pretend that an apology could fix what I've broken, but I want you to know that what happened, what I allowed to happen, was never about love. Not real love. It was a moment of weakness, of vanity, of selfishness, and it's one I'll regret for the rest of my life. You didn't imagine things. You saw clearly from the beginning, and I'm sorry I ever made you question that. You deserved better than that from me, from both of us. I've moved out. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. I'll respect whatever decision you make because it's yours to make. You're stronger than you think, and you are not the one who failed here. Ethan." Kira read it twice, then folded it again and placed it back on the nightstand. She didn't cry, not for him. He was a closed door now, one she had no desire to reopen. And yet, some part of her appreciated the clarity, the acknowledgement. Too little, too late, but real nonetheless. The following week was filled with the slow work of reclaiming her life. She took time off from work, explaining only that it was personal. She deep-cleaned the apartment, boxing up memories, tossing out everything Ethan had left behind. She called the landlord to ask about changing the locks. She made lists, did laundry, cooked for herself. These small tasks grounded her in ways she hadn't expected. There was healing, she found, in the mundane. She didn't speak to Jasmine. She didn't answer the messages, the missed calls, or the long email filled with apologies and explanations that arrived 3 days after the wedding. She couldn't bring herself to read more than the first sentence. "Kira, I don't even know where to begin." It didn't matter where Jasmine began. The damage was done. The betrayal had been chosen again and again, long before it was ever discovered, and no amount of guilt could change that. One afternoon, a week after the wedding, that wasn't, Kira drove to the lake. It was a place she used to go when she needed to think, when the world became too loud and her heart too heavy. She parked in the familiar lot, walked down the winding trail, and sat on the same bench she had once shared with Ethan on a breezy October day when everything had still felt safe. The water shimmered under the sun, vast and patient. She sat there for hours, her thoughts drifting like the wind across the waves. She thought about trust, how fragile it was, how quickly it could be shattered, how slowly it could be rebuilt. She thought about the cost of silence, the power of instincts, the weight of being dismissed. She thought about love, what it was, what it wasn't, and how easily it could be twisted into something unrecognizable. And then she thought about herself, not as a victim, not as someone who had been wronged, but as someone who had survived. She was still standing. Scarred, yes, but unbroken. That night, she opened a new journal and began to write. Not about Ethan or Jasmine, but about herself. Her hopes, her fears, her desires for the future. It was the first time in weeks she had written anything at all, and the words came slowly at first, then faster, pouring from her like a dam breaking. She wrote until her hand ached and her eyes burned, and when she finished, she felt lighter. There were still conversations to be had, bridges that would never be mended, questions that would never have satisfying answers. But for now, that didn't matter. She didn't need resolution to begin again. She only needed truth, and she already had it. The first true breath of clarity came quietly, not in some grand revelation or in a dramatic gesture, but in the simple act of watching her own reflection. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the bathroom tiles and warmed the porcelain of the sink, Kira stood in front of the mirror, toothbrush in hand, and noticed something different. Her face looked tired, yes, a little thinner. The dark circles beneath her eyes had faded only slightly, but there was a hardness in her gaze now, not bitter, not cold, just steady. She didn't look like someone waiting for an apology anymore. She looked like someone who had made peace with the apology never coming. It had been 2 weeks since the wedding, and the dust had begun to settle. The messages slowed. The silence deepened. Her mother hadn't called in days. Her father's name no longer popped up on her phone. Jasmine's attempts at contact had dwindled to sporadic bursts, fragments of contrition sent too late and met with no reply. Kira hadn't blocked her, but she hadn't responded either. Some boundaries didn't require words. They announced themselves by absence. She returned to work that Monday, slipping back into a version of herself she hadn't worn in weeks. Her colleagues welcomed her with a mix of caution and curiosity, offering concerned glances and hesitant small talk. Maya, her closest friend in the office, pulled her aside during lunch and hugged her so tightly that for a moment Kira felt herself fold inward. She hadn't realized how much she missed being seen without being dissected. "You okay?" Maya asked gently. Kira offered a soft smile. "Getting there." And it was true. Each day felt less like survival and more like living. She still had nightmares, brief flashes of Ethan's voice or Jasmine's laugh echoing in places they no longer belonged. But they faded faster now. They didn't anchor her to the past in the same way. Her mind had started to clear. Her sleep deepened. She could eat again without feeling like the food would turn to ash on her tongue. And when she laughed, truly laughed, it no longer startled her. But healing, she discovered, wasn't a straight path. It twisted. It stalled. Sometimes it dragged her backward. The weekends were the hardest. Without the structure of work, the quiet stretched too long, and the temptation to revisit old wounds whispered at the edge of her thoughts. She avoided social media altogether, refusing to let herself wander into the curated galleries of other people's perfect lives. She deleted photos, archived messages, threw away the candle Ethan had bought her on their first anniversary. Each act was small, almost petty, but each one made space. And space, she had come to understand, was sacred. One evening, she received a message from Stephen. Short, unexpected. "I just wanted to say thank you for your honesty, for your strength. I hope you're doing okay." She stared at it for a long time before replying. "You deserved to know the truth. I'm sorry it hurt you." A few minutes later, his reply came. "It hurt, but it set me free too. Take care of yourself, Kira." She didn't reply again, but the weight of the message lingered warmly. It reminded her that not every truth she spoke had caused destruction. Some had lit the way forward for more than just herself. The following weekend, she was surprised to find herself packing a small overnight bag, not for a motel, not to escape, but to visit an old friend in Milwaukee, someone she hadn't seen in nearly a year. Ava had reached out during the chaos, offering an ear, a spare room, a place to land. At the time, Kira hadn't been ready. Now, she was. The drive north was therapeutic. The rhythm of the highway, the open road, the shifting scenery, all of it provided a sense of forward motion that no conversation could match. When she arrived, Ava pulled her into a hug that felt like home. They spent the weekend talking, cooking, watching movies. Ava asked questions but never pushed. When Kira shared, it was on her terms, and Ava listened without trying to fix or soften anything. It was a gift Kira hadn't realized she needed, to be heard without being handled. On Sunday morning, as they walked through a nearby park, Ava turned to her and said, "You know, I always admired you." Kira blinked. For what? For seeing things clearly, even when everyone else tried to blur the truth. Most people would have pretended, would have let it go to keep the peace. Kira looked out at the lake, her arms crossed against the chill. "I thought about pretending. I really did." "But you didn't," Ava said, "and that's why you're still standing." The words stayed with her. They echoed in her mind during the drive home and resurfaced later that night as she sat on her couch, legs tucked beneath her, journal open in her lap. She thought about the girl she had been before all of this, confident but naive, trusting but unaware of how easily trust could be weaponized. She thought about the woman she was becoming now, scarred, cautious, but grounded in a way that felt new, real. That week, she started therapy. Not because she was falling apart, but because she wanted to understand how she had kept herself together for so long. The first session was awkward, full of long silences and half-finished thoughts. But by the second, something opened. She spoke about the dynamics of her family, the childhood she had glossed over, the patterns she had tolerated. She cried. She laughed. She let herself be raw. She also began to reconnect with herself in ways she hadn't for years. She started running again in the early mornings, headphones in, breath steady. She began painting on weekends, filling canvases with colors that reflected her moods, bright, angry, soft, hopeful. She volunteered at a shelter twice a month. She took herself to dinner once a week, and she stopped apologizing for taking up space. One rainy evening in late spring, she received another letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jasmine's. She didn't open it right away. She left it on the counter for 2 full days, walking past it, debating whether to read it at all. When she finally did, it was in the quiet of the night, curled on the couch, a blanket over her legs and the city's lights glowing faintly outside the window. "Kira, there's no excuse, no defense. I was wrong. I was cruel. And I knew what I was doing long before I did it. I wish I could say it was a moment of weakness, but it wasn't. It was a choice. And I made it. Again and again. You didn't deserve it. You never did. You've always been stronger than me, smarter, calmer, one people relied on. I envied you more than I admitted. And I wanted something that wasn't mine. Ethan meant nothing in the long run. He was never really what I wanted. I think I just wanted to feel like I could take something away from you. That makes me sick to write. But it's true. I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to figure out why I did what I did, why I hurt the person who loved me the most. I don't expect forgiveness. I wouldn't forgive me either, but I needed to say it. I needed you to know I'm sorry. For everything. Jasmine." Kira folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. She didn't cry. She didn't write back. Not yet. But she felt something shift. not a reconciliation, not a reopening of doors. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she wasn't carrying the weight of Jasmine's actions alone anymore. And that was enough. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, the apartment felt still in the best way. Not empty, not haunted, just hers. And in the darkness, she whispered to no one but herself, "I'm free." If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video for another powerful journey, and share this one with someone who needs to hear it.